Welcome to the Plant-Free MD podcast with Dr. Anthony Chafee, where we discuss diet and nutrition and how this affects health and chronic disease, and show you how you can use this to optimize your health and happiness, both mentally and physically. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming on to another episode of the Plant-Free MD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Chafee, and today I have a very special guest, Jayne Buxton, who is author of the Plant-Based Con, which is an excellent book that we read in our Patreon book club meeting recently. Jayne, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Nice to be here.
So I'd love to talk about your work and your book in particular. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your book, and we'll sort of get into it?
Sure. Well, I am a writer, and I've written a whole variety of things in the past, nonfiction and fiction, journalism. But I really came to this book as a concerned citizen more than anything else. I started to become very alarmed around, the middle of 2019. I started to notice a real increase in the volume of the arguments for everybody to be vegan, to save the planet, and every other reason that they could tack onto it. And then I saw the movie The Game Changers and realized how many people were taken in by that. And I just thought, wow, this is going to become a real big health crisis if we're not careful. And particularly young people are going to be the ones that suffer because they're going to be taken in by it. They want to do the best they can. And they think that this is the best they can. So they're all going to go vegan, or at least try it. And so I thought, well, a book has to be written. And I looked around, and there were books on this subject. Of course there were, and there have been some fantastic ones. But I felt there was still a bit more to be said. And I felt that there was room to really address the subject head on, which is what I did. And the title is very head on. It's quite controversial, and purposely so, because I really wanted people to sort of sit up and think, oh, well, there might be another point of view. What is it? Even if they think I'm crazy. I just needed that to be the first thing that they registered.
Yeah, well, it is a great name. Just the great Plant-Based Con just really hits that home. I mean that one of my more popular lectures, I just named "Plants Are Trying to Kill You," and it just it just takes it there. It just said, "Hey, this is what we're talking about." So I think it's a great head-on message, and I thought you did an excellent job. For the book, I mean, there are a number of parts, and first of all, you argue or basically you present the evidence for and against. Is a plant-based diet actually healthy for you? So, what are they saying? Makes up a healthy plant-based diet, and why are they saying it's better, and why may not that be the case?
Well, I think that they say it for all kinds of reasons which are untrue. So they'll be saying, and most of the argument in favor of a plant-based diet, it seems to me, rests on the demonization of saturated fats and cholesterol. So whenever you read any sort of popular mainstream article, they'll be talking about, oh, well, you're better off getting your protein from a plant source because animal sources have cholesterol and saturated fat, and that'll raise your cholesterol in your body, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that we have disproven those links, and that we now know, and it is widely acknowledged, that cholesterol in food has nothing to do with cholesterol in your body. The fact that the link between saturated fat and cholesterol, LDL, has been shaken, if not completely debunked, repeatedly, particularly in the past 5 years. There have been a number of studies. That doesn't seem to stop the arguments still being made. So then you have to think, well, how are we going to argue with that? So you have to unpick all that data around saturated fat. And I did that over a very, very lengthy chapter, and probably too long, but there was just so much to be said. But the reason I then go into the reason why I don't think that a plants-only diet is good for health. And I think it rests on probably 4 key arguments to do with the nutrients that are in that diet, i.e. the lack of them, The excess of anti-nutrients in the diet, the poor quality of the protein, and the excessive carbohydrate intake, which is usually consistent with that diet. And, what are the health implications of that? There are many, and we could go into those. But those are the main reasons that I argue you're not better off eating a plant-based diet. So I think you'll be very familiar with this. I think you have an encyclopedic memory for, studies, and which I've seen in action recently at a conference. So I know that you can cite all kinds of facts and studies around just the stuff I'm talking about. But what a lot of people really don't realize when you tell them, they're shocked, is that you can't get certain nutrients from plants. You can't get vitamin A. You can't get B12, D3, K2, creatine, heme iron. There are so many that you can't get. EPA, DHA. And they kind of look at you dumbfounded because they've been taught and led to believe that plants are gods, that they have all the nutrients we need. So that's a big surprise. And then you have the other side of that nutrient coin is the fact that some nutrients that you can get are less bioavailable. So the iron being one of them. There are very low amounts of zinc and methionine and leucine and a number of other things. And in fact, the WHO recognizes this. So for zinc, for example, they have increased the recommended daily allowance for those countries where there's not much meat consumed and where it's mostly grains. So this is a complete acknowledgement of the fact that the zinc from the grains is not doing the job, right, and that you need to therefore eat double the amount of even the RDA, and that's not happening around the world. But so yeah, that's the nutrient argument. And then of course there's anti-nutrients, which speaks to your point earlier about plants are trying to kill you. So there are these compounds in plants that, again, people are so unaware of. And I think we're becoming a little bit more aware of things like oxalates. Now, thanks to some popular work being produced, the likes of Sally Norton, Toxic Superfoods, making people aware of the fact that there are these things called oxalates. They're little crystals that can form. They can cause anything from gastro distress to kidney stones to arthritic joints to brain fog. There are a whole number of repercussions of eating those. And it's probably okay if we're eating them in small quantities, but in a vegan diet, you're not going to be eating them in small quantities. You're probably loading up the spinach, right? You're loading up on the chia seeds. I never know which way to say that. Is it chia or chia? Anyway,
yeah,
I eat them. And there's 100 grams in a of oxalates in a tablespoon of those seeds. And then you'll have, say, 1,000 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams in a big serving of spinach. Well, this is probably 10 times what you should be having in oxalates in a day. So you are correct that in large quantities, plants are trying to kill us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor at Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. But for those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, people just don't recognize that. And so we're saying more plants equals better health. And that's one of the arguments is that, well, these studies show that the more fruits and vegetables you eat, the better your health outcomes, and the more you eat, the lower your cancer rates are, and all these sorts of things. But those are a bit disingenuous too, aren't they? Because they're not comparing. It's not that you're replacing meat with fruits and vegetables, is it?
No. No. So they're not taking the carbs out of the question. They're not taking the bad elements of the diet out of the question. And there are also epidemiological studies that are probably, take them with a grain of salt because they're probably inaccurate, right? So anytime you're asking people to recall what they've eaten and to tell you, was it 5 servings or was it 10 or did I have any? Actually, since I'm on this survey, I might say 10 because I think that's what they want to hear. You get all this kind of stuff going on, which means you really can't say that link is a proven one at all. Now, I'm not saying that vegetables don't have some benefits. I think they do, and they clearly have some vitamins and minerals, phytonutrients, which again is a double-edged sword, but which is what we're talking about here. But I think you can also get very, very good nutrition from animal source foods with just a few vegetables or even no vegetables. So I think it depends on the quality of the nutrients. It doesn't really matter where you're getting it from.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing too, is that I don't care to eat any plants. I don't feel that I need, and so I'm happy with that. But I don't have a problem with other people.
Eat eggs and cheese and dairy, or you just meat.
Mostly meat. I'll have some meat sometimes. Dairy, very rarely. It's 99% of what I eat is just beef, and that's what I feel best on. And so I rarely eat chicken, rarely eat pork, but that would be maybe beef, lamb, pork, way down here, chicken, maybe probably fish above pork, but mostly beef. Yeah, the vast majority of what I eat is just beef, and that's it. I don't go in for the keto snacks or carnivore treats or anything.
They can be another road to hell on their own. Can't they?
Exactly. Just a big steak. That's my carnivore treat. Like that is a treat. Yeah. I've never felt unhappy with a big amazing steak. I don't know if that's humanly possible unless you're just not hungry.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't begrudge people eating this stuff. It's just, I just want them to understand, you don't have to. It's not, it's not like, I don't mind eating the salad, but it's not that you don't have to. It's just, hey, this can be a problem. And even the people acknowledging, well, yes, but there may be a hormetic benefit, right? Because if it's poisonous, maybe a microdose of that poison could be hormetic, right? Well, not everything is hormetic. Some things just are bad. And so, but if it were hormetic, it is a small dose. And then after that small dose, you get damage, right? So you really need to quantify that. And no one's doing that. And so no one's even recognizing it needs to be quantified. And so I think that's probably the most important thing, that I think, that I'm trying to do here. It's just make people aware that question should be answered, or at least asked before diving headfirst into this sort of diet.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess you, like me, will see personal cases, individual cases of this all the time, where you're dying to say to somebody, if you only tried this, if you only tried cutting out some of those vegetables that you've told me you're eating and adding some fish or some meat into your diet, you might find your health problems reversed. I came across a young woman who'd had ME for 6 years, and she's 23 years old and hadn't been able to get out of bed most of the time. She could barely make it to the kitchen, she stopped school, all that kind of stuff. And she was starting to feel a little bit better. I think she got a new cocktail of drugs, and she came out to lunch, and then she said she was vegan. And I thought, did it ever occur to you that the veganism could be the whole driving force behind this? And nobody had told her this. And I didn't tell her it because her mother's sitting there, and her mother's a vegetarian. And it's not the kind of environment where you can play doctor. But it made me weep. The fact that nobody said, she hadn't managed to read anything or find out anything. And I sort of hoped she'd read my book and then maybe decide to try something. But it's very hard because, as you say, you don't want to tell people what to eat. You just want people to have their eyes open.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe you can just, send her like a Christmas in July present of your book. I mean, like,
Yes.
I got this for you, I signed it. It's for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, and just, just an unsubtle hint that
Yes.
maybe this is doing it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
you did mention, in some of these studies as well that, that it's the balance of evidence isn't just in the plant-based side. There's actually quite a lot of evidence that just not eating these sorts of plants or meat-based is actually beneficial, and other things that are sort of mixed. I believe you spoke about a study with the WHO had like 50,000 people looking at, they were eating sort of plant-based and they didn't actually see much benefit. Can you talk about that a bit?
Oh, that WHO one. I'm trying to think which one you mean. Did I tell you about that, or was that in the book?
In the
I
book,
can't
yeah,
remember.
yeah. So
I do.
yeah. So it was
Yeah.
saying like it showed.
Oh no, yeah, the World Cancer Institute actually.
Oh, sorry,
Um,
my fault. Yeah.
yeah, that's okay. And they had done studies, a few studies that said there's really no evidence, for
Mhm.
instance, for eating loads of plants prevents cancer.
Mm.
So we only have small epidemiological subsets of those studies, but that particular study didn't show it. And of course, the WHO study, which everyone uses to damn meat, is the 2015 study, which came out with the conclusion that red meat was probably carcinogenic, and processed red meat is definitely carcinogenic. And so, if anybody, I'm sure your group of people, that your regular listeners will have already cottoned onto this, but there's so many debunks of that WHO
Mm.
study examining why it's led to the wrong conclusions, why it was badly done, why the evidence can't be trusted. And in fact, the most damning thing I heard said was Dr. David Klurfeld of the USDA, who had taken part in the study. He'd been one of the 15 scientists doing it. He said it was the most uncomfortable, awful experience of his professional life, because he saw the evidence being skewed. He saw good studies, important studies being thrown out, and weak epidemiology being used as a basis for these grand claims. And, unfortunately, the world still cites that study. It comes up every time. Don't you know the WHO says
Yeah.
meat will give you cancer? It's quite extraordinary, because even if you could trust it, I mean, even if you could trust that the methodology was robust, which it isn't
Mhm.
or wasn't, the hazard ratios of 1.18 are just so infinitesimally small that really nobody should be paying. I don't think anybody should be paying any attention to those. When you consider the noise in the system that probably surrounds that hazard ratio, it's just a nonsense, to be honest. And at the same time, what we tend to have is this discounting of studies that are showing the real health benefits of eating meat. So let's forget that meat might be bad for you. How about meat might actually be good for you?
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that there was a study came out in, I can't remember where, Nature, I think, showing that L-carnitine has a cardioprotective effect. And then, you read further down the paper and it tells you where you get L-carnitine. Okay. And of course you get it from meat, fish, eggs, and especially from meat. So here we could be having a narrative that says, if you want to prevent heart disease and keep your heart healthy, make sure you have a bit of meat every day. And we don't hear that, because those studies are never given the prominence. Never. I never see them advertised, sort of promoted in our mainstream press over here. I don't know if you do in Australia, but it's always the vegan story. It's always the vegetables which are getting the headlines.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, other studies that have shown the benefits of carnitine. And people say, well, carnitine is not an essential amino acid. Obviously, we make it, so that's a moot point. But that's not quite true, because there are a lot of studies actually show that more is better. Yes, we do make it, but not everybody does. Only 30%. 30% of people don't make enough or even at all carnitine, right?
Yeah.
So some don't make any or make it in deficient amounts. And so, you're going to have negative health outcomes if if you aren't getting that in your diet, specifically with your brain. I don't know if you came across this, but there was a study out of Texas A&M that looked at autism, and they found that there were higher rates of autism in parents who were vegan and vegetarian, and they found this connection with carnitine. And so it was in these children who weren't able to make enough carnitine, and they weren't getting it from their diet because it doesn't exist in plants or fungus. And since they weren't eating meat, and they especially weren't eating red meat, which is a very high amount of carnitine, that they were deficient. And unfortunately, it's unfortunate that they weren't getting it, but carnitine is integral for the development of neurons. And so, they were getting a misdevelopment of their neurons, and unfortunately they were getting, intellectual impairment as a result, which is tragic.
It's interesting you bring that up, autism and the connection with meat eating, because I got myself into trouble recently. I went onto a podcast with a comedian who professed to be very open-minded. And we were talking about this, and I mentioned that I knew of somebody who had cured their bipolar, for instance, with a meat-heavy ketogenic diet, that ketogenic diets were, which are meat-heavy, are used to treat epilepsy and autism, and that people are seeing good results. Well, the reason I got into trouble is this person objected to the very idea that we should be trying to treat or cure epilepsy and autism and view them as illnesses. So there's a kind of political correctness that sets in when you're talking about this stuff as well, right? You have to be very careful, because I guess she was coming from the school of thought that said, what's wrong with autism? Right. Well, I think that if you have extreme autistic behaviors, both the people suffering and their families would really like to find ways of reining those in. Well, yes, we know autistic people also have many other great capabilities, right? But they also have problematic behaviors and neural functioning, as you say. So I think when you get the issue clouded with that kind of level of fear of discussion, political correctness, that's another barrier to understanding. Forget the whole bias against meat. That's another barrier.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Well, is just an illness, and why should we try to fix it? Well, because we try to fix illnesses.
Yes, we do.
That's why we have doctors. That's what we do, or at least try to do, or at least set out to do, or at least that's what we take an oath to do. Whether we do it or not, who knows? But that is the whole idea, is curing illnesses. And you're not less of you're not any less of a person. You don't matter any less because you're in an accident, you lose your legs, but it would sure be a lot easier to go through life with two legs.
Yes.
And
that's right.
And we put on prosthetics as well. Someone loses their leg, they get a prosthetic, and it helps them walk. Well, why are you trying to do that? They're just as good of a person with only one leg limping around. They don't need those crutches. How dare you? You're insulting them. And the person there's like, hey, please give those back. I like those. Those help. And so. I think that that's very fortunate that they didn't really think too much about that. But of course, anyone who has autism or has a family member from autism, of course they would want the best for them. Of course they would want something that would help them. That doesn't mean they're going to love them any less if they don't get the help, and if it doesn't help them, change things dramatically. But if you can help someone who has that, why wouldn't you? I know many people. And first of all, there are actually plenty of studies. There are studies looking at, there's actually a whole paper, a very long paper that just said, a ketogenic diet as a treatment modality for autism.
Yeah, I've seen that paper. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is in the published literature. I mean, this isn't just like anecdotal. We've seen some people.
Yeah. We've not made it up.
No. And so, there are already, medical institutions that are using ketogenic metabolic therapy as an adjunct to treating kids with autism, and they're getting fantastic results. And I had a lady on my podcast named Allie, and she had a son. I met her at KetoCon. I met her son, and he was a very nice little boy. Seemed pretty normal, and didn't think anything of it. And she said, this is my son. He actually is a nonverbal autistic. And I'm like, thinking to myself,
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure I heard him speak. And then she followed up
Right.
by saying, only when he eats carbohydrates.
Oh,
Yeah.
good God.
Yeah.
Good God.
And so she, was on carnivore. She was transitioning them and just getting him on it. He was doing better and better and better. And then he'll go over to his grandparents' house, who at the time weren't necessarily on board. And so,
Yeah.
they're trying to like, oh, well, they want cookies, they want candy. Let's just give them that and have this nice bonding time, doing drugs together, I guess. And the kid would come back and he wouldn't be able to speak for 3 days. He would go
Wow.
there normal and be mute for 3 days. She was able to get him basically on a carnivore diet or at least strongly ketogenic
Mhm.
based diet. And after about a year or so, I don't know exactly the time, she messaged me and she said, my son has just tested into the gifted program in school.
Oh, that's an
So
amazing story.
yeah,
Wow, that's
I
fantastic. Yeah.
and I mean,
Yeah.
even if there was an off chance that could happen for your child, I would,
Hmm.
I would really want that for my kid. And
Yeah.
get a chance. I had another conversation with a gentleman, Jonathan Griffiths, and very nice guy. He's a professional bodybuilder in the UK. He does carnivore and carnivore coaching, things like that. And uh, autism came up in the conversation, and he just said, he was like, actually, I'm autistic, and I would not have guessed that for a second. And he said,
Mm-hmm.
if I had, before I went carnivore, 1 year ago, I would not have been able to have the conversation we're having right now.
Wow.
And he's full, a full grown adult, and yet it
Hmm.
still had that dramatic difference for him, which I think is just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Every time I hear one of these stories, it sends shivers down my spine. The idea that something so powerful and yet so simple is also something that a lot of people don't know about and won't accept. It's very interesting. When I wrote the book, I put in a short chapter on carnivore diets because I really wanted the world to know about the healing impact of meat only diets. For some people, for some conditions, but also what can we learn about that, about the value of meat in itself for all of us from that story, right? And it was the one area where my publisher was a little bit afraid and really
Mm.
would have preferred that I take the chapter out because they said, are you saying everybody should be carnivore? Well, no, I'm not saying everybody should be carnivore. I'm just saying everyone should be aware of what carnivore can do for people in certain situations, and that it is something to be experimented with, perhaps, something certainly to be open about. And so it was a short chapter, but I was allowed to keep it in, and I was very pleased with that. But it strikes me that people are so afraid of talking about the benefits of meat, like
Mm.
it's going to reach out and attack you if you talk about it, sort of thing. Whereas we're not afraid to talk about, wow, carbs are this. I love carbs. Let's eat more carbs. Carbs are fun. Everybody loves carbs. Um, and yet you and I both know, and lots of us are aware of the extreme harm done by excessive carbohydrate intake. So for your autistic patient or person, then of course that's one example. For diabetics, pre-diabetics, people on the road to diabetes, it's criminal what carbohydrates do, and yet we sort of lionize them because
Mhm.
they're essential and they're good and they're delicious and we all need them, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, and they make a lot of people a lot of money. I think that's
They
that's
do.
the main thing. Yeah. I learned about the base of the food pyramid at one point where it was the government had bought up too much grain, basically say the world will guarantee all the grain that you
Yeah.
produce. And so, we'll buy it. Don't worry about it. And all of a sudden they had this massive amount of grains produced. And we're like, shit, why did we do that? And so all of a sudden they came out with this like, new recommendations. You need, 9 to 12 servings of grains a day. It's so good for you. Buy it up. And oh God, I'll go right now, And so,
Yeah.
and they were like, oh, thank God we got that off our shelves. Okay, take it back then. After you've sold off your con, and, speaking about, plant-based
Yeah.
con,
Yeah.
that was a con,
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so when you're done with your con, just say, oh, hey, actually, you know what, guys? Oh, sorry, it looks like things have changed. We'll just, maybe 3 to 4, something like that, But they
Yeah.
just kept it in for decades.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's
yeah,
still in there, that whole,
yeah,
thing of whole grains. It's still there, isn't it? In great quantities.
yeah.
Yeah. I wonder what will make them take it back, when they will rescind, because I remember Fiona Godley, of the ex-editor of the BMJ, went to a conference a couple of years ago. Actually, it was 4 years ago now, with Swiss Re, and it was concluded that all the advice on saturated fat, for instance, was proven incorrect. And she said there needs to be a big mea culpa from everyone who supported it, a big turnaround. And we
Mhm.
haven't seen it. We haven't seen the AHA turnaround. We haven't seen any of our official dietary organizations turnaround. And is it just money, do you think, or is there a pride thing? Is there a resistance, an institutional resistance to making that turnaround?
I think it's probably both. I mean, with the AHA, I mean, they were frauds from the get-go. There's a lot of people on the pay of the sugar industry, and that's why they misrepresented the Framingham study, decades ago.
Mm,
And 2 years after the Framingham study was published, they reported the opposite results on cholesterol and heart disease, right? So the Framingham study actually showed that as your cholesterol goes down, deaths from heart attack and stroke go up, and they reported
yeah.
it as, oh no, the higher your cholesterol goes, the more death from
Mm,
cardiovascular disease goes up. So it was a bald-faced lie. They did it on purpose, and so it's not like that. Ooh, we got this wrong. Sorry about that. They're like, yeah, we know we got it wrong. Shut up. So like, they were doing this on purpose, and they're trying to cover their tracks. And now they're just trying to now they're just gaslighting people. So
yes.
those
Yeah.
the influences they still have in their life, or maybe they just don't want to like admit anything. It's like politicians. If you admit that you got something wrong, then then people are gonna think I'm wrong. Next time I have to be infallible, which is stupid. And even in politics, because people like Keynes, Maynard Keynes, Lord Maynard Keynes in England, he
Mhm.
routinely would change his mind on things, and people, oh, you're flip flopping. This is like, no, when new evidence presents itself, you change your opinion if you need to. That's
Yes.
called being responsible, and it is, and so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people loved him for it. He was very, very popular for that, because they
Mhm.
knew that if he said like, "Oh, actually, this was wrong," like he would tell them. So they
Mhm.
were more willing to go along with him, because he would say, "Hey, let's back up," if he felt
Yeah.
he needed to.
And those people are rare. It's also Professor Tim Noakes is one of those
Yeah,
people who flipped as
yeah,
he saw the evidence. And of course, people pillory him now for having flipped. Yeah, a lot of people like to pillory him, but so it takes a big person to do it. I also think it probably takes a lot of that old guard dying off.
hmm,
So we
yeah,
need as the fresh blood comes in and they don't have anything to hide anymore, and they can tell the truth. That might help. But it is
yeah.
yeah, it definitely does need some sort of mea culpas do need to be said.
I think so. Yeah, and I mean, and certainly there's still industry money involved in
Definitely. Mhm.
all parties involved. So I'm sure there's that. Um,
Mm,
So going on in your book, you do
mm,
go on and you discuss the other aspect of this, which is the environment. We're saying, oh, we have to save the planet, even if. And I actually talk to people and they say, look, I agree with you. I don't feel well on a vegan diet, but we're going to destroy the earth. I have to do my part. And so this is a very well responsible ethic that people are
mm.
taking, but and they're trying to do the right thing, like you say, especially younger people that are like, hey, we need to do something, we need to change the world. They've got the energy and the ambition to do it. They don't, and they want a direction to go in, and seems like the most obvious one. And so they're
Mm.
saying, look, I'm with you. Eating meat is the best way to go. I agree with you on that, but I still don't do it because of the environmental issue. So for people in that camp, I mean, are we going to destroy the world by bringing back the buffalo?
Uh, oh, we may destroy the world by bringing back the buffalo, but we're not going to destroy it by keeping eating cows. Now, it's interesting that you bring the whole bring back the buffalo thing, because there have been a number of experiments in bringing back wild ruminants to certain parts of the world. And in Tanzania, a particular study comes to mind in 2023, where they showed that the wild ruminants were generating just as much methane as the cows before them. So the trade-off is, but you're not eating the wild ones, and they're just trampling all over the place, right? Nobody's managing them either. So the biodiversity is not being managed, because animals do need to be managed in some way in the real world anyway, not in fantasy world, but in the real world. So the whole methane equation is interesting, but whether, we need to go back to basics, which is understanding whether the methane problem, the emissions problem, is as bad as people think it is from cows. And the bottom line is that it isn't. It doesn't mean that we can't make improvements, and there are things that we need to do. But the basic case is exaggerated, and it's exaggerated because we're using a metric which is GWP 100, which exaggerates the warming impact of methane from cattle by 4 times. And that is acknowledged. This is not some made up thing. This is acknowledged by the IPCC and the CCC and climate scientists. None of these claims about the emissions from cattle take into account carbon sequestration. They don't take into account the fact that we're counting life cycle emissions for cattle, but we don't do that for cars, so totally unfair comparison. Cars, it's just what comes out of their rear ends. For cows, it's everything, what they eat, the land they're on, everything, right? It's just completely mad. And then you get basic lying, right? So you'll get something like Cowspiracy saying that cows are responsible for 50% of all emissions. Well, a lot of people go around believing that still. This is 8 years later, they still believe that. And I see it written down in lots of places on protest placards and things. Now, that number, even at the time, the number was 14.5%, not 50. So that's a big, big lie. Now the FAO is saying that actually it's about 11% global livestock as a percentage of total emissions. So yeah, there are lots of problems with how precise you can be in measuring these things, but we do know one thing for sure, which is the case against the cows is being exaggerated to great effect. And then I think that the potential for cows to help the situation is being underplayed. So people are not talking about the role that livestock play in land management, in creating carbon-rich soils or soils that have the capability to be carbon-rich, as it were, through their actions of eating and trampling and weeing and pooing and everything else. We're not talking about the biodiversity benefits of having cows on pasture. The return of butterflies, dung beetles, all kinds of insects that feed on the cow's manure, the birds that then feed on the insects, so it's a whole cascade effect. And people will, I think, say, well, cows, not all cows are managed in that way. And that's true. So a feedlot is not doing all those great things. Feedlot cattle are not doing those great things. But we could make them do that. We could manage them in that way. So we could be saying, let's revolutionize the way we farm cattle and make every cattle ranch, every farm as good as the best ones. Let's make everybody do a Gabe Brown or a Joel Salatin or any number of the Alan Savory farms that he has evidence of. That has huge potential, and people like to discount that potential. They don't believe it. They think it's a fairy story for some reason, because it's based on real experience and farmers on the ground, practical experience and their numbers, right? It's not some fancy model which is concocted in the ivory towers of Oxford University, where they shove a bunch of false numbers in, a bunch of assumptions, and lo and behold, they come out with something, a case that's condemning of livestock. So the whole thing needs to be shaken up. And as I say, I'm not saying that we don't need to do certain things to improve the methane and emissions picture and to improve the way we manage livestock. And we may need to therefore reduce certain types of meat consumption. And again, it's usually monogastrics that we are told we should be reducing, because I think there was a study by Tadici a little while ago that showed that if you just made a shift of about 10 to 12% from chicken and other monogastrics to beef, you could reduce the overall emissions burden by 5%. So that's huge. And everybody, we recognize that monogastrics, chickens, pigs, they are fed grains, which are often grown on deforested land, and that's the thing we really have to stop. So in the future, we may be eating less chicken. I don't think we need to be eating less beef.
Yeah, and
We
from
need
the
to switch.
yeah, absolutely. And from the ethical standpoint, that's one of the stats. As Mark Twain said, there's three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And so they use these. Obviously, they can just make damn lies about statistics, like we've seen.
Yes.
Saying it's 50% of emissions, but some of the clever ways that they'll manipulate things is there was a study out of University of New South Wales in 2011 that showed that if you're eating sort of large animals like cows and sheep and things like that to grow 1 kilo of animal-based protein, you kill 25 times less animals than 1 kilo of plant-based protein, right? Because there's a lot of downstream effects from monocropping and things like that, and you're killing all these animals, and pesticides are killing birds, and then they're killing trillions of insects, which then aren't able to be available for the food supply for birds. There's even bigger knock-on effect, and things getting in the waterways and so on. So you're actually causing a huge ecological disaster from growing these crops, and with the biodiversity issue, plant-based proteins and nutrients. I think that if you considered, the bioavailable amount of protein there, I think it would be much larger than 25. And then I see some people that say, well, no, if you look at chickens, if people just ate chickens, then you'd actually kill, you'd kill like slightly more, chickens than you would these other animals. I was like, yeah, we're not talking about chickens. Right. Because, there's about 300 chickens per cow. Right. So,
yes.
So you're saying there's 3 times, you have to eat, you kill 3 times as many chickens as you do these animals to grow crops. Great. So that means that, you have to, do 100 times less animals if you just eat a cow, because a cow is 300 chickens or something like that. So I mean that's them sort of tacitly admitting that, but of course they use that example because it furthers their point, and you have to sort of watch out for those little weaselly ways of doing things.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something about if we looked at nutrition, not say kilos of product, nutrition, bioavailable protein, bioavailable nutrients of other kinds, amino acid profile. If you looked at that and said, okay, which delivers that better for a given unit of emissions, GHGs, you would suddenly see the playing field evening out, or maybe being more in favor of the animal proteins. But we don't talk about it that way. We talk about kilos of product or calories. And it's just not a good way to evaluate food. We don't live on calories. We live on, well, we do to a certain extent, but we live on nutrients. And empty calories are just not what we need to be looking at. But everything we're talking about is complex.
Yeah.
And it seems to me there's only a certain amount of appetite for complexity in this whole debate. And policymakers want short, sharp, visible, demonstrable benefit generating policies. And so rather than have this whole debate about let's over time shift our farming system towards more beef, less monogastrics, let's make sure everybody is using regenerative principles so that we're storing X amount of carbon per acre, we're retaining the water flow, and it's not, therefore we have less flooding, all of these other benefits. They won't talk about that. Instead, they'll say, let's cut emissions so we can meet net zero. So let's kill 30% of the cows, which is what they're recommending in Ireland right now.
Yeah, which is
It's a
crazy.
very, very short-sighted policy. And not only is it unjust, because what about the people farming the cows? And what about the nutrition? It's also short-sighted because it will rebound. We will get rid of the cows in Ireland if it happens, if it goes through. And that meat will just come from somewhere else, probably somewhere worse, where the cows are not raised very productively on grass, probably in some feedlot. It'll be cheaper and it'll be worse. And so the net result for the world will not be any better. It's just that Ireland will temporarily have cut down its emissions. It will reach its net zero target. It's just a numbers game. And I wish that we could make more people aware of how those simplistic arguments and simplistic policies really are going to backfire.
Yeah, and especially when, I mean, we're sort of missing the forest for the trees as well when we're talking about this. I mean, obviously we have an impact on this earth, especially with pollution and different. I mean, it's the ecological disaster that is agriculture. I think it is a huge one. You were losing 27 billion tons of topsoil every single year because of our farming practices. It's an area the size of Kentucky every single year. So that's massive. So, people in Europe, that's, an area the size of, well, bigger than Ireland, probably, another quarter, again, the size of Ireland. So big territory of topsoil, which takes 500 years to grow, a centimeter. Right. So that's a vanishing commodity. And it's a resource that will run out, and will run out pretty quickly. So, we're not thinking about that. We're thinking about our emissions. Fine. It's fine to do that. But, let's put this in context, because nothing matters outside of context. So everything that we're doing, all emissions, including all agriculture and cars and everything like that, is less than the emissions that are produced from volcanoes every year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's less than all of the emissions from all the naturally decaying plant life around the world every year. And all of that encompasses about 5% of the total CO2 discharged in the world. 95% of it comes from the oceans. And there's really nothing you can do about that. And they say, well, if you heat things up, it heats up the oceans, and then it produces more CO2, which is true. And Al Gore talked about that in his talk. The problem with that is that there's about a 700-year delay. It takes hundreds of years to heat up these oceans, right? That are miles deep, and so 70 some percent of the surface.
The expression "fiddling while Rome burns" is never been more apt than it is now, and a few scientists are saying this. They're trying to speak, and a recent paper just came out that said, look, beef in the US, 2% of emissions. Yes, we can shave some off that by doing things differently, farming differently, by putting additives in so that the less methane is burped out, all of those kinds of things. But really, it's a drop in the bucket, because it's only 2% of the US emissions. So shouldn't we be looking at other sectors where we get more bang for the buck? And of course, any sensible person will see that that's what we should be doing. But they either don't want to go down that route because cows represent a convenient storyline, that lets others off the hook, or they don't know how to get those other sectors to fall into place. I don't think we know how to reduce consumerism, how to stop fossil fuel burning in the name of growth, in the name of things that we buy, right? And we don't know how to stop, and I don't have the answer to this either. We don't know how to stop people flying. We don't know what a world would be like if we are not flying. And we've become so used to being connected in that way, seeing people living all over the world. And there are huge benefits to that. So nobody wants really to attack that too much. So the poor old cow, defenseless, and the poor old farmer who's also defenseless, is the battering ram. It's sort of like, okay, let's try that, but it's really very, very short-sighted, as you said.
Yeah, I agree. Um, so just to just to wrap up, is what
Mm.
who's driving this? Like, who's behind this? I mean, it's not just. I mean, there are obviously well-meaning people out there that are pushing this, but they're not the driving force. They're not the ones behind this, you know, convincing people to take on this lifestyle. Who is it exactly that's behind all this?
There's no one group, and there is no one person or group orchestrating everything. The way I look at it is it's a whole group of different interests who all have a stake in a plant-based future. And therefore they align with one another. And it's almost like they form this ring, where they link arms, and it makes this argument so unsurmountable, irrefutable, right? So we know why corporations are interested, right? They'd rather make cheap processed food with cheap soy-based and corn-based ingredients and make a lot of profit on it. There's not a lot of profit in eggs, and there's not a lot of profit there's no profit in milk. And yes, there's some profit in meat, but not for the farmers, only for the big guys in the chain. So we know why corporations are interested. We know why the Seventh-day Adventist Church is interested in pushing this narrative, because they've constantly had, since the beginning of the foundation of their church, they've had a belief that meat was evil and that we all needed to eat nuts and seeds, a vegetarian diet. So they're creating research that supports the cause constantly. They have universities and hospitals. And sometimes you can look at these studies and you notice it was peer-reviewed by Loma Linda University, Seventh-day Adventist University, and you know that they're giving a free pass to anything that's vegetable-like, right? You just know that that's happening. So we know why they're doing it. The media, I think, is pushing this along because some of them are lazy, some of them are incompetent. They don't know how to look at a paper. They don't know how to report on this stuff. And they just go with the zeitgeist because it sells newspapers, right? And my experience of dealing with some of the media is some of them were very brave with me, and others just refused to even talk to me about the book because we can't go there. We can't go there. It's too controversial. So they're failing to do what the media should do, which is to be brave, to question things, to look at all sides. They're just not. So, you have these, and then you have the so-called, the altruistic so-called organizations. You've got the Vegan Society, you've got PCRM, which is the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which sounds like a group of doctors who are doing the best for human health, but it's actually an advocacy group of which only 10% are doctors, right? So they're just advocating. And so they're doing it because they believe in animal welfare and animal sentience, and that is the number one priority. So you see, everyone has their angle. And when you add all the angles together, you get a pretty big force. And I think that's what the problem is. And they can all call on each other to support each other. And the very thing that we did today about talking about the claims about health and the claims about the environment, when you match those two together, it is very hard to argue against that, because you'll get hit by one or the other. So if somebody thinks meat's unhealthy, they'll go, but not bad for the environment, or the opposite way around. They can always call on the other argument to back up their own, and it's insurmountable. But I feel we must keep mounting the battle.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly something that I've noticed when debating people, or, just not even in formal debates, but just in discussions where people will say, well, vegan, how dare you, and all these sorts of things. And I'll just say, well, look, it's just purely from a nutritional standpoint, this is where I'm coming from and all that sort of stuff. And so they'll try to debate me on that. And, it's all the normal ones, cholesterol, what about fiber? You're not going to get all the nutrients, very easy stuff that, you've answered 1,000 times. So, it's all just fresh in your memory. And then, once they feel themselves losing ground, they'll pivot to, whoa, but I mean, the disaster on the environment and all these sorts of things. And all of a sudden it was like, look, that's a very important thing to talk about. And we can definitely talk about that. But I'm just talking about nutrition here. I'm just talking from a nutritional standpoint as a doctor for my patients and myself. I'm just saying this, and they're like, okay, all right. And so you keep going that. And then you wear them down, but you keep them on point, and just say, okay,
yes.
And you'll wear them down, like, okay, all right, fine. Well, yeah, well, I agree with you that nutritionally, this is definitely the best way to go. But environmentally, like, this is just a disaster, and we just can't afford to do this. 8 billion people, this is unsustainable. Okay, well, that's great. Let's talk about that. And then we go into that. And then halfway through that, they feel themselves like going like, oh my God, I'm losing this one too. Like, what the hell happened? And then they go, but I mean, ethically, you can't just murder all these. And that's something that's very important. And I agree with you. This is very important. But right now we're just talking about just environmentally, and they're like, okay, they go back. And once you get them on those, and then they'll go, okay, all right, fine. Okay. Yes. I agree with you on the nutrition and the environment, but I mean, how can you justify murdering? Glad you asked. So and then you go into that, and
that's a good strategy. Yeah.
Oh, it's the only way. I mean, because people just slip by, and that's the problem too. With having these debates online, is because people can just slip off, and if you're face to face with someone, talking with someone, it's very, very difficult to worm out of things, because you can just quickly just be like, no, you're running away from it here. This is a red herring. This is like, we're talking about this, and if they're just still just talking about this other thing, it's just like, okay, this person's lost their mind. I mean, it's just not a normal way of conversing. So, but you can do that on online and on Twitter and things like that, and so. You'll see, a bunch of slippery eels. They just will not answer questions, will not stay on the topic, just constantly changing. Go, well, what about blah 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 blah? No, we're talking about this. You made this point, and you're wrong. And here's this. Defend your position, and they'll just talk all over it and find one thing that you said, and they'll just spin a tangent on it and things like that. So it's difficult with those guys, but everyone else sees what they're doing. And everyone else sees it being completely dishonest.
Yeah. So I have a little bit of faith that the argument will win the day. I think I have to. I agree with you. You pick the arguments off a little bit at a time. What we are seeing is that despite all the noise, the actual conversion to veganism is not terribly high. And, it still remains, 2 creeping up to 3% of the population. Now, and we also see that the alt meat market, whether you're talking plant-based meats or lab-based meats, is floundering, right? Sales are shrinking. We just had a big company called the Meatless Farm go bankrupt this week. 3 years ago, I was writing about them as having been the new star that was being funded by Channel 4, our Channel 4. And so they've gone under. Every day, almost, you read about a vegan restaurant, can't make it, closing, or going back to selling animal foods. So it's clearly a bumpy ride, and, maybe that's always the way. But I know there's somebody, the head of the alt meat lab at Berkeley, in California, says that lab meat will never work. Never. Because all of the difficulties involved in producing at scale, all the possibilities of contamination, the impossibility of recreating the very functionality of the protein, the way it operates, animal protein operates. So if he's saying it, then I think we should take note. And so I think all of those things add up to, okay, I don't think we're going to have an easy replacement here with all these other sources of meat. So we're going to have to go back to the nutrition question again and say, okay, what is it worth to us to have that better nutrition? We need some of these foods in our diet. And I hope that that's where we'll be in 4, 5, 6 years' time when this whole alt meat thing is played out. Which I hope it will.
I do too, and I think a lot of people are becoming aware of this. People like yourself, are pointing this out, like, hey, we've been lied to, we've been misled, And I think that message is really resonating with people because people don't like to be fooled, especially when their good intentions are taken advantage of. It's always the story with con artists. The most successful con artists are the ones who conned people who were a bit sleazy themselves, and they get them involved in cons that are like conning someone else. Like, oh yeah, we're going to do this thing on it's going to be this backdoor sort of deal. We have some inside information. We're going to do this on something, and it goes horribly wrong, and someone dies. Like, oh my God, we got to get out of here. And they get out of there, or they realize they've been conned, but they're like, you know what? How do I go to the cops? They tell them that we were going to try to, screw someone else. I mean, criminals don't go to the cops when they get robbed. And so, but, honest people that are doing things for honest reasons, and they're saying, hey, I'm trying to help the world. I'm trying to help people. And they have their good, honest intentions are being corrupted and manipulated. I think that really offends people, and it really gets them upset. And so, I think that's going to galvanize people as well. When a lot of these young people realize that they've been taken in by this, their health has suffered, they're really, really unwell, and it's actually damaging the environment, and it's really only profiting certain people and pushing an agenda for whatever reason. I think that's gonna bother people. It's grown quite dramatically. When I came to Perth, no one had heard of what I'm doing, and I mean, people thought I was out of my mind, and I had to have that conversation where I would stepwise people through this. No, we're just talking about nutrition. We'll get to that. Okay, now we're talking about environment. Okay, now we can talk about that. 2-3 times a day, easily, every day. And I for years, like 2 years. And then more and more people, were listening to that, and they sort of spread out and started making more copies. And a lot of them were vegetarian. There was a big vegan vegetarian movement when I first got here. I mean, the whole
is that right in Perth?
In Perth and just in Australia, it was a huge plant-based movement. And so, that was a bit of a counter. And so a lot of the people I was talking to were vegetarians or vegan. And I've got a 100% kill rate on them. Someone who actually engaged and talked to me, and even some of these people online, if they'll actually engage and not weasel around, I've gotten all of them. And, now, a couple of years, even before I started my podcast, I would talk to people and they'd see what I'm eating. If I'm at the hospital, I'm just got 10 eggs and 6 strips of bacon. And people, oh my God, you're trying to pack in the protein. I'm like, well, this is the only thing I eat, so I need to eat a lot of it.
Yes.
They're like, oh, you're doing a carnivore diet. And I'm like, and they'll call it by name. And they're like, oh yeah. It's like, well, yeah, I am. And well, my brother's doing that. He's actually, he feels really great doing that. Is that a good thing? I was like, yeah, it works for me. I do great. Yeah. And so now people are doing that. I've had patients recognize me, in the emergency department, go down. I'm like,
really? Right.
And neurosurgery is very niche, right? There's not many people that need
well, but there's a reason for that, because it's pretty damn difficult, I would imagine.
And and so it's you get not all that many patients need us, but here's this person who has this issue, and all of a sudden we're talking about that issue, and I'm admitting them into the hospital, who's going to get in for surgery. And then so I literally just came back because I forgot one thing, came back, grabbed something out of his chart, and he just said, hey, can I ask you a question? I was like, yeah. I was like, do you by any chance just only eat meat? And I'm like, yes. Why do you ask? And he was just like, I actually follow you. I've seen your podcast and things like that. So this kid had recognized me and then not realized quite who I was. And then was like, I think that's him. And so, now you're getting people, recognizing this and recognizing it by name. And so I think it is growing. And I think that grassroots movement, which is the only way that's going to grow, is there. And so, and now we're getting to the point where we're starting to get a bit more attention. We're starting to get in the news, Daily Mail in the UK.
I saw that. Yeah. My goodness. Yeah.
Called bizarre behaviors of this, doctor. He only eats meat, hasn't eaten vegetables in years, all these sorts of things. And so, what was that? What did Gandhi say? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they attack you, then you win. So or maybe they tag me. Yeah, I think that's it. And so, they're definitely, at the point of saying, oh, this is ridiculous. Like, oh, come on, this is a joke, because they were ignoring us before. We weren't big enough to pay attention to. Now they have to pay attention to us, and they're making fun. And they're saying this is ridiculous. This is just, this will go away. So we're in phase 2. And so I think if we just keep moving forward, and that we'll get there in the end.
Yeah. And your podcast is a great communication vehicle. Of course, you are in the home of, in a stronghold of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Australia too, aren't you? With sanitarium and those links. I don't know if have you had Belinda Fettke on your show?
I haven't, but I plan to. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think you should have both of them if you can, but Belinda tells a great story. I think more people in Australia definitely need to know that, because that's where it really, has its strongest influence, I think.
Well, which makes perfect sense with how strong the plant-based push is here, and the vegan vegetarian push is here. And the various Australian nutritionists who are just like, no, this is the only way, this is the only way, this is the only way. And just everything coming out of their mouth is just pure propaganda. Yeah. And it's like, that's what they've been taught. And it's fully understandable why they think that, is because that's what they studied for a number of years.
And that's what they're being paid to say, because the cereal manufacturers are, sponsoring this and that, and sponsoring the dietetics organization. And, how can you escape from that? How can you escape? So keep up the fight.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And you too. So, and that, I know you have to go. Thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to see you again. Hopefully see much more of you in the future. Yeah.
Maybe in a book club, maybe next year's PHC conference, whatever.
Yeah. Absolutely. Maybe both. And, so the book is called The Great Plant-Based Cons by Jayne Buxton, and I highly recommend this for everyone to read. It is a very comprehensive look into the science and literature and the robust arguments on why eating a plant-based diet is not what it's cracked up to be. Jayne, how do people get a hold of you and follow you and find your book?
Book is on Amazon and in some Brave bookstores. You have to hunt it out, because not all of them were brave enough to put it front and center in the window. And it's available in paperback now, which is a lot easier for people. It's half the price, so that's good. On Twitter, I'm just at Jayne Reese Buxton. I also have a website, which is also jaynereesebuxton.com. I'm not hugely active on Instagram, but I will engage with people who send me messages and want to be constructive, and I've met some great people that way.
Lovely. Okay. Well, we'll put all the links for that in the description. Not a problem. And so people can find you there. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. Jayne, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Take care.
Hey guys, thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to what I had to say. If you like it, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast. And if you're on YouTube, then please hit that little bell and subscribe, and that'll let you know anytime I have a new video out, which should be every week, if not more. And if you could share this with your friends, that would help me get the word out and let me know that you like what I'm doing. Thanks again, guys.